So first of all, thank you all for being here. This is the third of these meetings, and I'll just give you a little bit of a run up to how we got here. Each one of them has been in different ways quite extraordinary. And what's been most interesting for those of you who do gatherings, you always get 100 people RSVP and then 20 people show up because this has been the only thing I've ever done in my career in which literally everyone who said they wanted to come has shown up. And I think there's a reason for that, which is individually, we all are doing good work. We're all making donations. We're all trying to solve our piece of the puzzle. And I think we've come to this realization that we can't do it alone. That as hardworking as we all are, and as much as focused in our industries as we all are, we come from very different places. We come from media, we come from politics, we come from advertising, we come from technology. And increasingly, when we get to the end of this, we'll have an even broader community. But this is, as Roger said in a conversation now 3 weeks ago, which has stuck in my mind, what we're talking about requires collective action. And so let me tell you how this 1 hour is going to go, and it will be an hour. It won't be an hour and a half. It won't be an hour and 10 minutes. I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to show you 3 brief clips from previous gatherings because I think they help set the conversation. My two co-conveners, Dawn and Roger, will each say something, and then we're going to, after setting the stage, open it up to a conversation. I'm only going to ask one thing that I didn't ask on Tuesday, and that is, I'm going to ask all of you to not tell your story of the work you're doing or your history, and the reason I'm saying that specifically is, A, we all have access to each other's LinkedIn or backgrounds, and secondly, we only have an hour, and I want to focus on either unique problems that you think deserve attention or solutions that you've seen acting out in the world that you think we could collectively amplify. So with that, here we are. It's June 30th, 1 p.m. And the topic of this conversation, which has changed from Tuesday, is You're Not Alone. And today is not about answers. It's about asking good questions. We will get to some answers, but not today. So here's the very quick agenda. First, thank you, and I'll introduce the people who are going to speak and tell you about the advisory board, which has grown dramatically in the last month. Then we'll show 3 clips. We'll talk a little about media and the definition of media, and then we'll get into an open conversation. So this is the current advisory board. Apologies for those of you whose faces are not yet on the screen. I've been kind of updating all these things in real time, but it's an extraordinary group and very generous and somewhat diverse, although I would argue that we could be more diverse, and we're going to ask for your help to do that a little bit later. If you want to look at the current advisory board, you can go to sustainablemedia.center/advisor, and you'll see the current advisory board. With that, I want to thank both Roger and Dawn and ask each of them, Roger first and then Dawn, to just speak for a minute about why you invited people to come today.
So thank you very much, Steve. So I come at this with essentially 4 questions. Question number 1, is it possible to have a rational information environment under the status quo, or do you have to radically change it? Question number 2, what is the role of journalism in society? Does it have an obligation to be a counterforce to power? Thirdly, why is it that when we have the conversation about the news ecosystem, that most of the energy is focused on national stuff, where we already know that all politics is local? It may be that all journalism needs to be local also. So what we really need to do is to solve the local journalism problem, which is interesting because it inherently doesn't scale. And so there may be a way to do a protected model there. And then the last piece, which is the one I've actually spent a lot of time on and have shared with at least a couple people on this call. Why is it that the people trying to create new journalistic enterprises do not rethink the fundamental economic model? Why is it that everything starts with the notion of, centralized newsrooms and ad-supported distribution models and all that? Because in my mind, there are other ways to think about how you do it that would, in fact, insulate you from the pressures of today's media environment. Those are my points.
Thank you, Roger. Dawn?
Yeah, again, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Steve and Roger, both. I'll just say that, I would love to hear from all of you about what, if there was a problem within media to be solved, what would it be for you? What is, what would the problems be? In other words, if we're crafting a mission around something, what would you like to see solved? Obviously, we're not going to necessarily solve it. Like Steve said, it's really more about questions, I think, than answers, certainly at this point, but I'd still like to hear what you all have to say about that.
Excellent. All right. So there were extraordinarily thoughtful conversations over the last 2 sessions. I'm happy to share with any of you the other 2 hours if you have 2 additional hours you want to spend on this. But I pulled out 3 clips that I thought would be kind of a good way to start the conversation. And so we're going to begin with Baratunde Thurston, who has something to say that I think is entirely relevant.
Hey y'all, Baratunde here. I'll nominate a concern. There's, yes, media can make a difference. It can make the world better, it can make the world worse. It's how we understand the world. It's media, it's in between us and the world. So it's the story that we hear and tell. What has been frustrating me greatly, especially with the latest flare-ups in the country, is that we seem to just have a very lopsided storytelling environment where the narrative of fear and loss and scapegoating targeted at white people is winning. And that's gonna eat the whole damn world. It's gonna kill everybody with guns. It's gonna take women's agency. It's gonna literally burn the planet down because a lot of white people have been terrified, and there's profit in the terror. There's algorithmic profit from these networks that don't care about the content, just about the likes and the popularity. And the same kind of analog algorithm affects our campaign financing. So IRL is just chasing digital in terms of hyping up these edge cases. I would be interested in efforts that are proven to reach and connect with folks with a different narrative. I'd be interested in highlighting and celebrating effective storytelling that does the opposite of that discord acceleration. And then I am particularly interested in a different story we can tell white people so they don't burn the whole world down and take us all with them. That's what's happening. And it's just beyond infuriating. And we're monetizing hate. So I'm still angry about Buffalo. I'm still angry about Uvalde. I'm still angry about George Floyd. I'm still angry about fucking slavery. And it's a story challenge because people get paid to poke at the weakest emotion and exploit that and make money off of that and gain attention off of that. It is not the only way, but it is the winning way right now because we've set the machines up this way, and then we set the rest of our society to follow those machines. If we can focus on some area of that, count me in to join another working group, to experiment myself. Thank you. That was an extended soliloquy.
So I've probably listened to that bite 35 times, and it never fails to put a lump in my throat. This next one will not put a lump in your throat. It's now we're on to some data. So let me bring onto the stage Doug Rushkoff.
What if we accept that we are dealing with scaled monsters of a sort, then we need a scaled golem to combat it. So what if rather than being just another center or organization or tight-knit wonderful thing, what if we thought that big? What if we thought like Council on Foreign Relations big, right? Where we have an organization like that, I mean, what is CFR really? But it's a bunch of elite, smart, powerful people. It's a great journal, and it's kind of authoritative. It has a weight, a heft to it that could that could operate at a scale that just some nonprofit organization can't by giving little grants.
And last but not least, our friend Bob Garfield is here with us today, but rather than risk that he not say something quite as brilliant as he did the last time, I decided instead to play the clip and then let him disagree with himself if he's changed his mind. So here's Bob.
Well, two things happened, basically. The digital age destroyed the advertising model. It destroyed mass. It created targeting. It caused, due to the unfortunate law of supply and demand, it caused the main wares of the media industry to lose 90% of their value practically overnight. So that was one problem. And the second problem was there were still tens of billions of dollars in the industry, 90% of which is owned now by two companies, Google and, well, I'll throw Apple in, say three companies. So there's Facebook, Google, and Apple. And they, that's everything. Everything else is crumbs. And whether this organization deals with public policy, whether it deals with kind of skunk works, laboratory work in the universities, whether it tries to reinstill trust in the news media, in my view, you have to follow the money. There is no profitability in this vast industry or group of industries we call media, except for what these three players have. And we're not going to solve any problems unless we face and deal with that reality, because, by the way, they are also, these three forces that have all the money are also destroying democracy as we speak by cultivating filter bubbles and all of the rest, which I needn't lecture anyone about. So if I have my 2 cents, it's to follow where the cents are and the dollars and the tens of billions and the billions of dollars.
So here's how we got to this idea of a shape. So I just spent the last 3 years leading the NYC Media Lab consortium of 6 universities based at NYU. And I saw great work, amazing work being done. I saw great intellectual work being researched. And then I saw mostly it being thought of as things that needed policy. And the policy was all aimed at Washington. And what I came to believe was, first of all, given the state of Washington today and for the at least near future, you're not going to see a lot of great legislation around, where media is made or how it's consumed coming out of Washington. Secondly, and perhaps more seriously, the reason why that's challenging is because, you really don't want the federal government legislating content. And so what we imagine here is a three-legged stool with industry, university, and makers. Certainly there's a policy component to this conversation, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But we think there's a place where individual media companies don't have the power to go up against large platforms, but collectively we might. And, I would only say this about my background. For those of you who've known me a long time, I started out doing a local television show in upstate New York, local news with video. This is now, some number of years ago. I've always been in the storytelling space. And I have, for most of my career, believed that technology was, I'm a techno-utopian by nature. And so it's only in the last couple of years that I've started having this feeling in the pit of my stomach that maybe without a significant change in how we expect technology to behave on the planet, we could actually have built something that is taking us all in a very bad direction. And my guess is that all of you have different feelings about that. And the intention here is not for us all to agree. In fact, the opposite. I think that as we get to know each other, we'll find we disagree rather passionately. But I wanted to show you one chart. So the question is, we use the word media kind of interchangeably. If some people use it to mean journalism, some people use it to mean, content distribution. But, our friend Evan Shapiro put together this chart. It's going to be a little hard to read on the Zoom, but I will send it out to anyone who wants to see it, or you can find it online. And the important thing is when he looks at media based on impact in dollars, what he sees is Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and then over here, this bubble that you may not recognize, NVIDIA. And, at the risk of angering some of my journalist loyalist friends, I thought I would show you where the New York Times is on this map. So it's a pinprick there in the center. And the point of this is, if we don't start thinking about media broadly, about games and about music and about platforms and about journalism and about all of these various things that people consume digitally, then we risk imagining that the media world we grew up in, because most of us are of a certain age, is the one that that younger people consume. And the best way that I can share that is, this is a report that came out just last week from Reuters. This is their digital news report from 2021. And it's a great read. If you haven't gotten it, again, I'll share the link. But here's the thing I think that hit me the hardest. And the phrase was selective news avoidance. And this is an audience that says, you know what? I don't want to consume news or information because it's too hard to watch, or it's too depressing, or there are a whole series of reasons. And keep in mind, this is Reuters. So this is not Trump. This is not the US. This is 56 different markets. And the selective news avoidance question comes up quite viscerally when you talk to young people about how they get their news. And the answer is, oh, well, it comes to me. I don't seek it, but it comes to me, and it comes to me mostly on TikTok. So I'm going to spend just one more minute and talk about TikTok. So this is, there are 3 or 4 articles here that are relevant. One is Gen Z takes TikTok seriously, and possibly publishers should too. The other is Gen Z is influencing the abortion debate on TikTok. And then the third is this event that happened yesterday, the FCC commissioner pushing Apple and Google to remove TikTok from the App Store. Pay no attention to the fact that the FCC actually has no legal authority to tell Apple or Google to do anything with their App Store, and that it was kind of a showboat move. That being said, you know, if each of you is not spending some amount of time on TikTok every day, you're missing the thing that's more important than any other single platform today. All right. So our mission, and then we're going to get to some questions. So we're a not-for-profit, and our mission is to investigate, experiment, and innovate solutions to improve the sustainability of our media ecosystem. Media today is having a dramatic influence on our society, our families, and our democracy. The Center for Sustainable Media works to harness the collective resources of our community and define new standards of media sustainability, and work to develop incentives to support media makers that embrace those standards. Now, to be clear, the word sustainability in this organization did not exist 3 weeks ago. We've tested it on a lot of people. We've gotten positive feedback that sustainability is a good place for us to look for improvement. That being said, both the mission and the shape of the organization is evolving. So with that, I want to get to some questions. And I want to start with this one. You know, what do people think is the core power and peril of the relationship between technology and media? And I'll open it to the floor.
Can't we dispense with this rather quickly? That it's the targeting media based on algorithms gives people only or almost predominantly stuff that they have demonstrated they like and presses their buttons, and to the exclusion of almost everything else. It's all candy and cocaine and no kale, and that it has cultivated communities, principally on Facebook, but certainly elsewhere, that are poisoned with the content they're consuming, and it has all the most deleterious effects on the body politic that we are living through right now. So yeah, it's a good way to target. It sure is that, and it's a good way to serve utilities, but it is a magic machine for distorting the truth, for delivering propaganda, and for inciting the mob. Can't imagine what would be number 2 after that. Oh, by the way,
I'll just add, to reiterate from what I said last time, is that it has taken all the money from mainstream journalism, mainstream media, that is now reduced to covering only national news, and to the exclusion of communities all across the country. So
If I could maybe add, hi, I don't really know any of you, Elizabeth here. I've sustained a career of working at the intersection of media and technology, only to wake up several years ago and realize that the unintended consequences of well-intended actions had destroyed the world as I had known it. So I guess that's why I'm here. But I just want to make the point that, with all respect to what the gentleman just shared, I didn't raise my hand. Sorry, I don't know what the
That's
decorum
okay.
is that what I just heard, I've known for 16 years, I've been a part of. So got two things I want to say about that. Is that one, how do we bring more discipline to those simple points that we can all banter off? They're well presented. And two, can we not be naive to the lessons for history that every new technology that has increased the flow and speed of communication from the Roman Empire and Greeks back on has created something similar to this, whether it be roads and transportation, whether it's busts of emperors in ancient Rome or civic pageantry in Florence and Venice. Power has used whatever the current technology is to further their actions. We have a certain scale now that's mind-bending, that has to do with network economics and network dynamics and human behavior in a way. But the pattern is well known. And I'm looking to be a part of a discussion at some point where we stop restating what is well known and begin developing I guess, and this is just a strong opinion because I think about it, that we begin to have some workflows of disciplined research that do absolute literature reviews. So I don't have to go to another gathering to say that, there's a lot of activity and the same, aren't we great? We're so innovative, we're going to reinvent it, versus looking at the last 20 years of reinvention and how it's failed, taking the lessons from it, humbling people who want to call themselves heroes, saying like, I got it wrong, fessing up to it like I have, like I fucked the world with my career, and taking those lessons and actually leaning in and doing something. And I think that's what you want to do. I'm just weary of going over the obvious, and that there's a literature review that has to happen. In the world of journalism, which I know, I've seen like the Knight Foundation be the #1 contributor to folly, in my opinion, because they fund the same project over and over again because it's about because it's news, not reflection on the past. And so I have a lot of notes here. I'm just speaking up because we don't have a lot of time, but the time when the fairness doctrine was taken away and what's happened with media, it's a scary time. For me, I care about journalism. I think that media is very broad, and I think we have to, my personal interest is in restoring the credibility of journalism and the specific nature of that as a kind of content in our information diet that's differentiated and well understood by the masses. And I don't care how it's delivered. I care about the intelligence of the questions that are asked. Anyway, I could go on a lot, but what I want to say is, can we get beyond the obvious in this group?
So to be clear, this group is designed for action, not for conversation. You will never be invited to another 30-person gathering other than maybe to have a drink in New York. I mean, we will break down into action-oriented working groups quickly, and we're not going to try and solve. I mean, journalism is one of the things we're certainly talking about, and a lot of people have interest in that. But one of the things there's some people on the call that I'm anxious to hear from, but I don't want to call on people in case they've got some reason they don't want to pipe in. So
I apologize for speaking up. I just
no,
get
you
invited
did
to something and I'm like, oh my God, I've been hearing this for years. So
no, you're here for exactly the right reason. But this is not the reason why this is an hour and not 3, and it's not a panel, is because we're going to look at some actions. So I'm gonna just tell one story, and then the person I'm going to talk about can choose not to add on to it. But now many years ago, Juan Enriquez handed me a copy of his book, The Untied States of America. And it has stuck with me because what the book did was looked beyond one of the things that's frustrating about information consumption today is that something happens in Washington or in the world, and every news channel then amplifies it for 12 seconds, and then they move on to the next thing that happens. And so for me, that book was the first time that I saw the changing demographics of America on a long horizon line with some very obvious, some very striking conclusions. And Juan, I feel like since I've known you, which is now a long time, you've always had this ability to kind of have a longer view of patterns rather than what's going to happen tomorrow morning. Does the idea of defining the word media more broadly than journalism work for you or seem problematic?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think, one of the things that Americans are singularly bad at is asking questions about what the shape of the country is going to be and what the narrative is. So one of the questions I always ask cadets at West Point when I talk to cadets at West Point is, how many stars will be in the US flag in 50 years? And the reason why that's not such a crazy question is because there's never been a president of the United States who's been buried under the same number of stars he was born under in the history of the United States. And 3/4 of the flags, borders, and anthems in Europe, where I'm sitting right now, didn't exist 75 years ago. So you've tripled the number of countries and borders and anthems and national narratives and myths in a very short period of time. And, there's a narrative where the US could easily become 55 states. If you add Puerto Rico, if you add the Virgin Islands, if you split Texas, if you split California. But there's also a narrative that says it's very easy to destroy a country if you spend $1 billion convincing 51% that they're different from the other folks in the country, that they shouldn't associate with the other folks in the country. And I think, it's not just the daily news cycle, it's the myth building around elections. It's the myth building or destroying around founding fathers. It's the myth building about who people are and what they are. And that sometimes gets reinforced by news cycles, but there's something else that's going on here, which is a profitability in segmenting, in dividing, in separating that is really dangerous, because I don't think the US would be better off as a separate nation or separate nations. I don't think the US would be better off losing states. And I think when you actually look at what happened in Britain with Scotland, with Wales or Spain, with the Basques, the Catalans, the Galicians, or with the Southern Finns, or the Corsicans, or the Northern Italians, the narrative the US is on is a very, very dangerous path. And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a centrist or whatever the hell. This is a story many nations have seen that doesn't end well.
Thank you. I'm hearing somebody's keyboard in the background. Just mute yourself if you would. So, Danny, can you just talk for a little bit about one of the things I think that's worth thinking about is how much what we call misinformation, how much of it is amplification of bad humor or individual bad actors, and how much of it is strategic?
Do you mean strategic, like how much of it is Putin versus how much of it is a rando guy in their basement? Is that kind of what, am I getting the question right?
Yeah, feel free to modify the question if there's a better answer than that.
I'm not sure that you can separate them is sort of my answer, right? If you kind of talk to like behavioral economics folks about this, it's like when the economic incentives are so strongly aligned with the kind of ideological incentives, it's hard to glean a motive for anybody. And that's true whether you're talking about like, Cyrus Masumi in Napa, California, or, the fact that like the TOS homepage runs giant Google video banner ads. And so I think it's hard to separate the two narratives. I don't think I can give you like a split. That's what I would say. I think it's just because the current financial incentives align so well with the ideological motivations. That is kind
So
of
I know I told people not to pitch their project, but you should talk about the actual report, the reporting you're doing, because people should see it.
Which thing are we talking about again?
Your misinformation tracking.
Oh, you mean
website.
the nonprofit
Yeah.
work? Yeah, I mean, so we have a nonprofit that I founded in 2016, 17, that basically, it's called the Global Disinformation Index, and we track, narratives and content around the open web to basically put the sort of the global block list together. And it's not a single thing; it's a monthly process that we grow over time, and then push that out to mostly ad tech partners to try to block, right, to sort of get in the way of the financial incentives. With mixed success over the last 18 months, I think we've blocked about $128 million a year worth of ad spend to these things. But that's about half of what we estimate exists. The other half is, of course, basically all Google at this point. So, I mean, this is why I say like it's hard to separate. We track state actors, we track individual entrepreneurs and everything in between. And I don't think there's really a clear line between one and the other.
Steve?
Meryl.
I want to endorse what we heard from Doug Rushkoff about institution building, which I think is really important, and also make the point about the timing of this group, because I think we're really at an important moment for not just the obviously extraordinarily challenging democracy issues, but also because there's a lot going on out there, especially in local, that lives in a vacuum and a world of hand to mouth. But there are hundreds and hundreds of people working at local right now who are way too dependent on the Knight Foundation to support what Elizabeth said a moment ago, and need both intellectual support as well as capital. And they get very little intellectual support and almost no business model help. And to the extent we can help them right now, which is a really interesting moment in local, we would be making a huge contribution, and institution building, as Douglas suggested, is one way to go about that.
From the standpoint of publishers, I think it's worth just putting out there. I mean, Facebook has said somewhat ominously, they didn't quite say we're getting out of the news business, but they kind of essentially did. And I don't know what other people that spend any time on Facebook's experience has been, but I've seen the amount of news and information go down dramatically in the last month, which I frankly find kind of pleasant, which I know, in and of itself is controversial, but like, what happens, for example, does Hearst find itself like, and again, I'm, even though this is off the record, I'm not going to ask for people to say things that are business confidential, but I'm curious as to, like, for publishers that are on the Zoom, does Facebook's change in the way it's looking to dispense money have a material impact on you? And if so, what do we do to fix that or replace it? I mean, Kevin, you haven't said anything, but you built a dramatically impressive media company at Quartz.
Thanks, Steve. I'm now running a smaller media company called Charter, and have deliberately not focused on distribution through Facebook. We've used email newsletters, as a direct relationship to users who have expressed an interest in what we're doing. So I don't, in terms of that the recent changes. I don't have a lot of perspective. I think it's a good question. The platforms definitely create economic incentives for you. Quartz was among the organizations that spun up a big-ish video operation because Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg had declared that video was the future of everything, and they put some funding behind it, and then only less than 12 months later they walked away from that support. So I think the interesting question for me is like, what would we do if we could abstract the economics, and like what does this look like? And that may not be, that's like not possible over time, but I'm not sure a lot of people are thinking about that sort of question with creativity and depth, and I think that'd be kind of interesting.
This is John Taplin here. Has anyone looked at the Australian model and also what the EU is doing in terms of trying to force Facebook to pay for content?
I have looked at it very closely. John, my basic problem is that providing subsidies doesn't solve the problem. So I'm all for forcing these guys to give up some of their ill-gotten gains. But what the news industry needs is a different business model. It needs something that is independent. I think that putting news onto social media has about the same chance of success as putting it on Pornhub. That people don't go to social media for facts any more than they go to Pornhub for facts. And so, again, I think the industry really needs to rethink its distribution model from the ground up, which is why I've spent so much time with Kevin over the last 10 years.
Can I add?
Certainly the people who are anti-vax or stop the steal people on Facebook think they're getting facts.
I'm not sure anybody really knows what a fact is anymore. I think the underlying principle is truth doesn't exist. And so you can talk about rebuilding institutions, but if people don't trust the institution is irrelevant. And if we don't have a common understanding of what truth ultimately is, then everything is fiction and it becomes whatever you want it to be. Now, I know that's not a solution and it's just pointing more problems, but I think the notion that there is no single source of truth that people can rely on or depend on, whereas that might have been journalism in the old days, I don't think that exists anymore. And truth is now in the eye of the beholder, ultimately.
That degradation of the truth is what I was saying is that, for me, a core thing here is the restoration of credibility. And, it's very simple for me, which is we eat junk food for news, and a well-heeled system put propaganda in place over the last 10 years, or since 9/11 probably really, to undermine people's belief in journalism and news, and to underline that credibility, to set the stage for those attitudes. Somehow I want to, and I don't know how to do this, but I want to study those techniques that took it down. And I'd like to apply them to building it up if they were that useful. And fundamentally, people are always confusing media with its content creation, presentation and distribution. And presentation and distribution has supplanted creation. And anyway, I just think that restoration of credibility and the fact that we need to figure out, just like how people have moved to, sustainable eating and healthy eating and all of those things. It's like we need people to eat a better diet. They need to know that they're eating junk food. And that's a long haul commitment to communication strategies that, I can't even begin to fathom. But I think, we're talking about a long road to hoe to that restoration. There's no magic business model for that, although a sustainable business model is important and local and community action is the core.
Yeah, but it's about to get worse. Zuckerberg wants you to live in a virtual reality.
Yeah, so you want me to wring my hands about it? So then we have to look at some policy issues, and we got to look at getting government action. But what I know is I know we're in a cataclysmic situation. Keeps me up at night. I'm just trying to calm it down and go like, all right, what do we do? For every time I complain about it or say, it's obvious to me. I just want to get my mind on, okay, so the next thing is coming. What are we doing about it today? So I don't mean to shut you down. It's just, it's exhausting to me, all the hand wringing, especially after everything else. It's just, it's time to understand it's real and keep weighing in.
So let me propose something that, so the reason the word sustainable came up and the reason why it's been the topic of many conversations in the last month is nobody can make an argument that media as it exists today is sustainable. And we use the same measures that you use from an environmental standpoint. Children are watching things and harming themselves, and there's data that backs up the fact that children, for example, if you look at TikTok in China, the number of minutes that children are allowed to be on TikTok's on Douyin, which is the TikTok Chinese partner, done also by ByteDance, the government limits access to TikTok among their population. Now, you could argue that that's control and that we don't want our government limiting what people consume or don't consume. But I don't even think we have an agreement either in this room or among our scientist friends as to what parts of the behavior of these experiences are addictive. And Roger and I had this conversation the other day, and I thought we were going to be aligned on cigarette smoking as an analogy, and we were not aligned on it. So, if we don't even have a measure of the way in which dopamine is used to addict people to behaviors, then how do we say to our community of industry partners and members, hey, we don't want to support platforms that are purposefully and strategically addictive? So maybe we have to start by defining what addiction is as it relates to access to digital media. And I'm sure there's good research there, but I have yet to see it.
So there was a Facebook internal meeting and a poll conducted after Zuckerberg announced the metaverse. And the most upvoted thing on the poll is how we're going to keep this from becoming the opium of the masses. That all their research said that if you spent 7 hours in the day in a virtual reality helmet, you were going to get addicted to it. So they know it. They don't give a fuck.
So it's a public health hazard. And I don't know, what are the strategies for dealing with that? I mean, it's a massive, it's basically, they're poisoning our water everywhere. So what do you learn from that?
It's what Roger's been doing. It's resistance.
Well, and that's why we're here. I want to point out there's some other power structures here, and maybe Avi, you can jump in on this. There are consumer brands that need to access consumers, and there are advertising agencies that take enormous amounts of money and point it at from consumer brands and point it at our audiences. If we had more control over our data, would that potentially give us another triangular way to negotiate other than waiting for government to get its act together and start to put some laws in place?
I mean, it's a great question. I don't, maybe, I don't know necessarily if our own access, controlling or having access to our own data changes the underlying principle of like why we're so polarized and where the content we get is coming from and what content we consume. I imagine that if we had more control of it, that may actually exacerbate the problem potentially. But I think at the end of the day, for me, I just go back to the notion of like we have put the premise of content in the hands of the masses. And, Steve, you and I talked about this a long time ago in the early days of social. It was like, kind of once you democratize the media, now the mob is kind of in control ultimately. And now I think we've just, the model has shifted on its head in many respects. And maybe we just need to rethink the paradigm from the ground up. I don't know what that means, but I just I fear that we're trying to fix something versus trying to reinvent it. And I always just go back to the principle of like, what is the truth now going forward? And journalism used to be the basis of that, and it isn't anymore. So either that needs to be changed from the ground up entirely, and I don't know how to do that. And I honestly don't know, and I don't think an institution can do it because the institutions don't have that credibility. So does me having control over my own data change that? I don't know necessarily.
So take this, here's a thought. If we put together a list of behaviors that we wanted media companies to sign on to that we considered sustainable, and they were broad sweeping, we did them as a group, and we said a sustainable media company won't knowingly lie to its audience, won't knowingly harm its audience, won't put a news banner on something that they know to be opinion. We came up with some number of lists, and a bunch of us work at different media companies. These are all internal. There are internal ethics and policies at any of these media companies. If we aligned them and said, you know what, here's 25 media companies that all have shared ethical framework, and we agree to Better Housekeeping seal of approval, we're signing on to this mission of sustainable media. And then we went to our customers and said, listen, when you allow your user data to be
Let me ask you
tracked.
a question. So, what the media companies are the vessel for the content ultimately, right? They still let's use these January 6 hearings as the example over the last few weeks. All media companies are covering, right, at the end of the day. So they can all sign up that they're going to adhere to certain standards and whatnot. But what happens when somebody gets up and says something at a podium and the thing that they say is entirely inaccurate, but then the media company has to cover it? So I don't know how that changes the paradigm, right? NBC, ABC, whoever, the Wall Street Journal can sign up for this list of standards. But if the people they're interviewing and the people they're talking to and the people around them all subscribe to these new ways of operating in the world that are pretty fucked up because they're serving some agenda out there, or whether it's a political agenda or ultimately chasing the almighty dollar in some respect, the media still has a responsibility to cover it. But what they're covering is bullshit now. We're not talking about ideas anymore. We're pointing blame and we're pointing fingers. At the end of the day, the conversation is the problem. The media is just covering the conversation.
Well, I want to be careful because I don't want the word media in this context to be news. News is certainly a part of the media that we consume. But I would argue, well, let's do this. The purpose of this conversation is to do exactly what we're doing. There's one more voice that I would love to hear, and then I have just a couple of thoughts about what we do next. Rob, you haven't said anything, but I know that you're, and Alan Weber was going to join us, but I think the relationship between politics and the changing role of the voice of media is important, and I know you've been deep in that.
Thanks. I'm mostly here as a listener and appreciate the conversation. What Avi was saying just really resonated with me. It's like there's just no going back, right? The genie's out of the bottle. The masses, it's democracy out there, and it's a shit show. It's a fucking mess. And so, from a political and an advocacy standpoint, I'm just trying to organize. And gather troops and move in a direction. I don't know the answers, but I'm grateful to be part of the conversation. I don't want to take up too much time.
That's a much different way of saying what I said, which is the genie is out of the bottle. I don't think you could put it back. So we have to figure out how to live with it in this new world order.
So,
and I guess what I'm proposing is finding a way to point dollars that consumers' intention is valuable. Brands want it. We've allowed a handful of platforms to be in the middle of that equation, but that does not have to be the only way that those dollars are transmitted.
So why isn't anybody paying attention to the safe harbors? I don't understand why. To me, that's the simplest solution. If you go back to what Elizabeth said, is how do we get back to truth being important? The New York Times can't knowingly print something it knows to be untrue because it'll get sued. But Facebook can, because it has a safe harbor, and Google can, and Twitter can. And so all of these companies have a very special liability shield that keeps them from having to moderate their content.
Hey,
Maybe we have to,
Jonathan?
maybe we have to hear from Juan again about where ethics comes into this conversation, or what he would say about that if he's willing to say something.
If I might, Dawn, just let me, there are codes of ethics, there are canons of journalism, which don't matter because the 1/3 of the audience doesn't believe they mean anything. They have their views of what the news media are, and they hewing to a canon of ethics, but I think most news organizations do, has had zero impact on the trust of the distrustful. Now, Steve, it seems to me that it's not a terrible project to try to create some sort of fair trade media conduct so that every signatory says we will do this, not only just with journalism ethics, but with distribution and content curation and content moderation and all that stuff, has standards that go beyond just how our reporting is. And if they sign on to that, maybe somehow, someday, it could be deemed a value add for the world of advertising that still largely underwrites these enterprises. So maybe a seal of good conduct or a fair trade media might someday change the status quo, which is broad mistrust. But so that could be one thing. Section 230 and policy stuff to get rid of safe harbors and to get rid of the impunity that these platforms have lived under certainly sounds like another potential project for this organization. As you know, Steve, my hobby horse is discoverability, which Chris Anderson wrote The Long Tail, and it was a brilliant book. He just didn't realize that the long tail was going to be just as unimpactful in 2022 as it was in 1992, that it's still a world of hits. And until someone solves the discoverability and distribution problem, 99.9% of all content will never be seen by human eyes and human ears. I would love for that to be one of the projects. But none of these issues is mutually exclusive. I mean, this is not just like one thrust, right? This you can take on various dragons to slay. No,
I want to make sure I want to get to just one follow-up, but before that, Dawn kind of called the question to Juan, and he didn't say no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, Juan.
No, that's fine. I mean, the one thing which all of us grew up thinking we knew right from wrong. And the one cautionary principle I'd stick into here is technology fundamentally shifts what we think is right and wrong 180 degrees. And it's done so time and again. And the stuff which we thought was right in the 1960s and 70s is 180 degrees different in many of our cases today. And as technology accelerates, it may be that the next generations have different options, see things in a different way. And boy, a lot of stuff which we take for granted and think, this is right, this is wrong, this is how we're going to codify it, actually ends up shifting. And we just have to be really careful with that stuff, because we're looking at shifts in values for society, which are just shocking. And you keep seeing it in society after society, where you think issues have been litigated and all of a sudden they get relitigated. And they don't get relitigated just by a small minority. The majority ends up in a position which many of us think, how in the hell did you get there? Hadn't we decided that already? And
as we've learned this week, there's no
to be very
settled
careful.
law.
There's no. All right, so let me tell you what we're going to do next. you're all going to get this will get turned into a 1-hour video, which will be shared with you. There'll be some selects pulled out of it. Tomorrow, you're going to get an email from me that's going to ask you 4 questions. It's going to say, yes, this is interesting. I've looked at the other advisors. I'd like to have my name added, or I'd like to join one of the handful of working groups that are being organized, or I'd like to contribute and help focus on the financial side of this growing enterprise, or this is great, but I'm going to stay out for now. Just to be clear, no guilt. Saying, hey, that was great, but I'm not going to be involved. Like, you don't lose any of us as friends or colleagues. We all have a lot on our plate. So please, you'll see that email tomorrow. Here are some things we need that you may be able to help with. We need more young people. We need people of color. We need people of different sexual boundaries. We need more diversity in this group, and we need a window into that world. So if you know of a way to get there, either through somebody on the creative side or somebody in talent, somebody that you think would be great and engaged, please reach out to any of the people on the advisory board. Second, we have a terrific pro bono lawyer. Thank you very much to folks at Mintz and Dan DeWolf. We need an accountant. We need somebody to hire. We're going to do an event in October, the first ever Sustainable Media Summit, which is going to be held at Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island. We need an event planner. And then we need a summer intern, even though it's already July. So those are the things we need. If you haven't looked at the website, please spend some time on it. It's sustainablemedia.center. Spelling corrections, adjustments, feedback, welcome. It's changing every day and getting stronger. And it really is a group effort, and I appreciate that. As of a week ago, these were the 4 kind of linchpins of the organization. Again, still evolving. And with that, I do like ending on time. Thank you all. This has been terrifying and thrilling, and really enjoyed spending the hour with all of you. Feel free to reach out and brainstorm. It's a big space we're trying to put a dent into, but it's important, or we wouldn't have all been here. So thank you all.
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon.